Hello and welcome to the Charles River Conservancy Parkland Show. My name is Renata von Schorner and we'll be talking about not only the parklands but the history of the parklands. And today we have with us Peter Howe. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Renata. It's an honor to be here.
Well, Peter Howe, you probably recognize his name both from the Boston Globe, where he was a writer and editor for many years, and he went to the New England Cable News, and in both places you have reported about the Charles River for many, many years.
Many years I've earned all these gray hairs.
All right. And now he is with as a senior advisor at Dental Line, and you told me that Dental Line actually, Jerry, is a Cambridge resident.
Yes, the Dental Line of Dental Line. We are a strategic communications, public affairs, public relations firm in Boston. There are about 25 of us. And Jerry Dental Line, her husband Jack Thomas, are residents of Cambridge, great lovers of walking around Fresh Pond and the Mount Auburn Cemetery, and devoted members of the community.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad you joined them and put all your knowledge of Boston to good news. And we also had the pleasure of working together when we had Tom Ashbrook be the moderator of an event called River Stories Live at Google. And you were right there, the third one from the right, among many authors.
I wasn't mad. That's not the best picture of me ever, but I think I was not mindful that the camera was on me.
Oh, well, it's all right. But you were very eloquent about your river story. You written a beautiful river stories, as have the other people. So that was a fun event of everybody being in love with the river. So I remember that Boston Globe magazine, The Renaissance on the Charles, and I kept that magazine. That was long before I started the Conservancy in 2000, because this magazine is now 20 years old.
October of 97.
97, and I hope you're going to read us a little bit from this article, and maybe other viewers have kept that magazine as well, because it kind of summarized so many things in a beautiful way, and sometimes it's these, it was also a Boston Globe magazine by, it was another Peter, Max Hall. He did a Boston Globe article called The People's River. And then out of that developed his book. So sometimes it's important things start as a Boston Globe article. So maybe one day you'll write a book about the Charles River, who knows. So that was you might remember those maps. And maybe you're going to read us a little bit of an excerpt from that paper. Give us the context of what made you write that story, or what did the editors want? What was the goal of that story?
Well, I would say it was at a time when all kinds of very positive things were starting to happen for the Charles River and for Boston Harbor generally. This was the Boston Harbor cleanup was underway, all kinds of efforts to improve the sewer system, to reduce combined sewer overflows into the river. And we even had an EPA administrator, John DeVillers, who was talking about the idea of a swimmable Charles River in the 1990s. And of course, everybody remembers that terrible song about the dirty water of the Charles. But we were really starting to see things get a whole lot better, that once we stopped abusing the Charles River with pollution and sewage, that the river began to clean itself up, and it got better and better all the time. And you saw all kinds of things. You'll hear me talk about in the story these brand new things in the mid-90s called the duck boats, and people rediscovering the idea of going out and touring. This idea of they would build luxury apartments next to the Charles River in Waltham or Watertown or North Point, Cambridge. And a sense that after a long, dark depressing period for the Charles River, a lot of positive things were starting to happen. And this story in the Sunday Globe magazine in October of '97 became really a way to pull together a whole lot of multiple river stories into one big story of something that finally was getting better.
Yeah, and I mean, it was 97, it was in 1995 that John de Villars announced that in 10 years, so 2005, the river would be swimmable. We actually did swim. I swam with John de Villars in 2005. We had a kind of impromptu swim event, Bob Zimmerman and Fred Lasky, to kind of celebrate the fact that the river is swimmable, but there was no legal place to swim yet and no legal occasion, so it was kind of more of an impromptu event.
Almost as impromptu as when Governor Weld
Yes.
and Secretary Durand jumped in the river.
Yeah, that was in '96. Yes, yeah, exactly. It's the Clean Water Act. Yeah. Well, if that'd be lovely if you could read us a little bit from this article.
Sure. And it's I think I need to remind people this was 1997 because I think it's some of these words. It was fun for me to go back and reread them, but I think people may find it hard to believe. But anyhow, here was how it began. If you clean it, they will come back. That might be the maxim for today's Charles River. Its progress toward health, though slow and still tenuous, has been well publicized, but perhaps less widely appreciated is the robustness of that renewal, the astonishing extent to which life, in all its profuse variety, is returning to the waters and banks of the Charles. From Route 128 to Boston Harbor, the murky channel that just a generation ago was considered a hopeless sewer now sports springtime runs of alewife and shad so abundant that state biologists have begun using the Charles as fish to stock other rivers. Under the shadow of the Channel 38 television tower, Channel 38, in Brighton, red-tailed hawks and cormorants can be seen gliding over the river, plunging in for lunch, or settling on a sun-drenched branch. A few miles upstream, great blue herons stalk riverbanks in Newton and Watertown that not long ago were weedy dumping grounds for asphalt and construction debris. Even long-gone river otters have been reported in the Charles River Basin recently. There's also remarkable evidence of the return of human life along the river. Strolling and cycling paths are gradually reclaiming precious riverfront that had been abandoned to muddy parking lots and trash-filled stands of Japanese knotweed. I'll just skip down a little bit to say a little bit later on, indeed, in recent years, the Charles River has been one of those rare examples of a natural resource that has gotten better the more people use it. Finally, reality is overtaking the river's reputation. People are seeing and smelling a healthier Charles, and more they want to live and walk along its banks and apply its waters in sculls and sailboats and cruise vessels. Such successes encourage more boaters, strollers, and tourists to use the river, and this expands the constituency that dreams of realizing the river's potential as a world-class playground for the region. It no longer seems crazy to wonder why Boston should not, like Chicago or Geneva, have safe, freshwater swimming available next to its downtown neighborhoods. And certainly when I think of people who have been advocates for freshwater swimming in Boston, put you right at the top of that list, Renata.
Well, thank you. Swimming is definitely something I'm very fond of. Being a Swiss, I not only swam in Geneva that you mentioned, but in Basel and Bern and Zurich. All these places have swimming rivers, and it's a very important part of city life there, and we hope to bring that back, and we'll have some images of that. So let's look at that wonderful river. You spoke of different parts of the river. We'll be focused mostly on the urban river, but since we just had the marathon, it's good to remember that Hopkinton is 26 miles by foot, but it's 80 miles by water. So there are wonderful parts of the Charles as it meanders through all these communities, and I know you have spent a bit of time with two key figures on the Charles River, just on the left-hand side of that urban parkland on the urban river, and that's Stan Driscoll and Bob Zimmerman. So tell us a little bit about your encounter with these two key figures on the rejuvenation of the Charles.
Well, so this was back in 1997, reporting this article, going out early one morning with the two of them in a launch from Cambridge near the Elliott Bridge up as far as the Watertown Dam, and it was an experience I had never had. I'd lived my entire life and gone to school my entire life, basically within 2 miles of the Charles River, and to get out there was so extraordinary, to realize what a beautiful place this was and to feel right in the middle of the city, so far away and so deeply in nature, and to see fish and cormorants and birds and aquatic life. And Dan Driscoll from the DCR was one of the key people we talked about in this story. People forget that if you've been along those marvelous paths that start at the Watertown Dam and now go one side of the river or the other, all the way out to the Marriott in Newton, those really did not exist 25 years ago. That is his great work, and that was reclaiming public land that had been taken by people, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes people just decided to pave a parking lot over it. But his ability to get that land back without litigation was extraordinary.
All negotiation, yes, very amazing work. And it's beautiful as well. I mean, there was the legal and political and personal aspect, but then he also designed beautiful paths along it.
Beautiful paths, and the beautiful motif where you see I forget what kind of bird it is, but the stone.
The heron?
Yes, the heron.
Yeah.
The stone markers that always sort of orient you and help, because you don't necessarily always know where the path is going to go next until you've done it a few times. But what an incredible amenity, the wooden boardwalks that stretch out over the river, just some of the most beautiful places that you can go right in the middle of Cambridge and Watertown and Newton.
Yeah, and you say Bob Zimmerman also was on that boat?
Yes, and Bob, has been an incredible hero. I know the Watershed Association focuses much more broadly on the river, the Conservancy much more about the basin and the metropolitan area, but one of the points that Bob Zimmerman really hammered away at for many years is the quality of the water in the very end of the Charles River depends very heavily on what's going into it the first 75 miles of that river. So the better job you do taking care of the river in Hopkinton and Weston and Dedham and all the other communities, the better Charles everybody downstream is going to have as well.
Yeah, and of the Charles River Conservancy and Watershed Association, we partner obviously on swimming, because we care about that, and it's very important what happens upriver so you can swim downriver. And you would think that the water is much cleaner upriver, but in fact the water is actually cleaner downriver. But it's important that we don't bring the dirty water down.
Right.
Yeah. So I want us to go on this urban map. So you described your outing with Dan Driscoll and Bob Zimmerman near the Watertown Dam. I want us to go now to the part on the extreme right, just before you get into the harbor. And that is the area that is often referred to as the last half mile or the lost half mile. It's the area between the Museum of Science, which is this very fat green bridge there, and the dam, the new dam.
Right, really all the way over to the right as you're looking at it on your screen. And this was not obviously the magazine story that we've talked about, but that whole area to the right there, when I was at the Globe, I wrote a lot of stories about a Central Artery Third Harbor Tunnel proposal for crossing the river there, known as Scheme Z, which was more than a little controversial. It was going to be 18 lanes wide, got redesigned to be much less intrusive, and I think one of the most extraordinary accomplishments there, and the Conservancy certainly deserves a lot of credit there, the fact that you have 14 lanes of highway connecting the Zakim Bridge with Interstate 93 north of the city, and yet there's that marvelous pedestrian bicyclist crossing that goes up and over the railroad tracks and kind of threads the needle.
Well, I don't think the Conservancy deserves credit for that. That's really a gift from the federal government. That was shovel ready, and then the federal government came in and donated that to the state of Massachusetts. So that's a gift of $32 million to the state of Massachusetts, to DCR. But it's a beautiful bridge. I mean, it's as beautiful as the Zakim Bridge, but it's wonderful. It's right next to the skate park, and it's kind of a viewing area for the skate park. and it's the connection between Charlestown and North Point Park in Cambridge, and it will lead to the swim park that we'll see later. So it is indeed a wonderful gift, and everything is coming together. But I want to take us back to that last half mile. So we have here 1925, we see the Museum of Science, which doesn't exist yet. It's just a park where the dam was, the Craigie Bridge, we see the viaduct, and I think there were some 18 river crosses. You were talking about the Zaker Bridge having so many car crossings. Here were a lot of railroad crossings out of North Station going over to Charlestown and to East Cambridge. Just an amazing industrial activity there. And then we are now looking from a different angle. Again, the Museum of Science has not been built yet. We see the Craigie Bridge in the foreground, and we see all these river crossings, and we look over to East Boston. And this area, we now, and that's now getting into the area that you were writing about. That is when the big dig was done and the Zaken Bridge was built.
Amazing to think how much transportation infrastructure has been built and torn up and rebuilt and reinstalled. And as we were speaking a few moments ago, I think one of the most extraordinary things as you look there at the Zaken Bridge is the idea that despite everything you're looking at, there's still a way for you to start walking down the river or biking down the river at Harvard Square and come through this area and sneak over to Charlestown and wind up over at the Navy Yard. And you know that despite everything you're looking at there, the harbor and the rest of the river have truly been reconnected if you do a little work to find the connection.
Yeah, and an area that is also going through a rejuvenation is this area called North Point. It's going to be a city of 10,000 people, part of Cambridge, and I know you've written about the Green Line and the shifting of the Green Line in that area.
Well, and that's, as I say in my River Story, one of the great things about spending your whole adult career in a city is you get to see things that you wrote about as a young man actually begin to happen when you're middle-aged or borderline elderly, as I sometimes feel. But this is where, as we're looking at it, where the Lechmere terminus for the Green Line will move across the O'Brien Highway, become the beginning of the new Somerville extension, and everything that you see within that white box becomes truly a brand new neighborhood, you know, with 10,000, maybe 12,000 people living there. And one of the things, you can see some development behind that already at North Point, where Education First is, where there are other, some beautiful new apartment buildings. The wonderful thing from the standpoint of the Charles River is everybody who moves into that community becomes an advocate for making that area even better. And, you know, that stretch of river goes from being forgotten to being people's beloved backyard and waterfront.
Yeah, and here we see of how that new city will in the North Point, how that will look like with a green space in the middle, and then the green space goes underneath the Gilmore Bridge down into North Point Park. So I hope you're right that everybody who will live there will become a park advocate. I mean, it is we've seen in the Seaport District where they felt there's not enough green space. It's very important for all these residents and all the people who work there to have that green space. It's so crucial for urban living to have that green space.
Well, and I know Cambridge, I know people will advocate very strongly to make that development turn out the best it possibly can, and you know, be as environmentally sustainable and renewable and good for the river as it can be.
Yeah, I think the green space is very important. Another very important part, and we see that kind of here on the next map, here is a map of that area, is the connections. I think it's very important to be able to walk and bicycle along the shoreline, across the river. You had mentioned the North Bank Bridge, which is a gift for the federal government. The South Bank Bridge, which is near Spalding, and that goes also on the south bank of the river. That's now at 25% design and will be just as beautiful as the North Bank Bridge by the same designers. There will be a pedestrian bridge parallel to the railroad tracks, so you can cross the river there from North Station. So these connections are so important, because if you can't get to a place, it's not real. And of course, we built a skate park there, right in the underneath the ramps, and have plans to build a swim park in North Point Park. So this goes back to John de Villar's dream, and Governor Well that he jumped in.
I think that I hope that I live to see the day that I get to jump in there. I'm thinking, among other things, not that we need to have an Olympics in Boston, but that is such a, coming from a TV background, such a great backdrop for some kind of swimming competition, water polo, aquatic sports, and what a treat that could be to be able to go out at your lunch hour. It's a 91-degree day in August, and you get to jump in and cool off for a while.
Yeah, and obviously this is just the first. We don't see that as a regional swim park. We see that the first of many along the Charles River. There used to be some 10 swim spots along the Charles. You would just come from your neighborhood and then just go down to the river with your towel, like you would do in European cities, and you cool off and spend a bit of time on the river, and then you go back and go on with your day. So that's it's a very exciting part. So what you had mentioned, this wonderful bridge that is part. Let's go back a few images here. That is we are talking about the area where this little round park is, and it's also a wonderful way they carved in those lagoons. It is a place where you can take your kayak and explore the shoreline. Very beautiful plantings and playgrounds. It's still little discovered. There is now a restaurant there. EF2 has now a restaurant, and I know you probably also wrote about the many configurations of the Scheme Z. That was part of your writing.
Yeah, yes, back in the 1991 time frame, and that obviously was such a giant challenge to figure out how would you get all these different highways, Storrow Drive, how would you make sure that they all connected to Interstate 93, to the Big Dig, and to the Tobin Bridge. I think most people who participated in that review process would say this certainly is better. It's not perfect. You know, it's nice to dream of what if a lot more of the highway here were underground, like it is in the middle of Boston, you know, the Greenway. But the fact that it seems like a small thing, but the fact that this bridge was put in that completes that connection on the north side of the river under these ramps, just the fact that you have a way to get through here and it's not, you know, a complete Chinese wall of infrastructure,
yeah,
you know, is making such a big difference. And to your point about the pedestrian crossing on the south bank, that will be an extraordinary breakthrough when that happens. And that whole area there with what Converse is doing, the development around the Boston Garden, the new Boston Garden development that's coming, again, just like at North Point, Cambridge, you can hope and expect that that leads to a whole new constituency to really advocate for continuing to make this even better.
And John de Villars, who was the secretary at the time and with the EPA, he made sure that there was a mitigation payment. There was $100 million mitigation payment. So that's how these parks, North Point Park and also Revere Park, the one on the right, was created. So we need to make sure we have the same parkland advocacy as we do the I-90 project, Alston Landing, because it has to be much more than just a transportation project. It needs to be a parkland project, an urban design project. So I hope we can take lessons from here as we now move to the I-90 project and don't create a Chinese wall there. I have another image that I want to show here, which I love. I love this rendering. It was created by Stantec as part of the feasibility study. So just imagine on a hot summer day going down there and enjoying that swim park.
That's beautiful. And I guess the duck boats would go take the loop around in the front of the picture to get by where you are.
Actually, this area is completely out of the of any boats. So, but I just realized we are running out of time. So I want to thank you, Peter Howe, for coming today, and I hope you continue writing about the Charles, thinking about the Charles, visiting the Charles, and I much appreciate all you have done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Renata.